Thank you for inviting me here today. What I'm going to do, or what I've been asked to do, is to talk about this book. It came out 3 years ago. Already it's in German, Chinese, Indonesian, Sinhalese, and English, of course. And apparently there is a Spanish translation being done at present, and a Vietnamese translation, which I hope will come out soon. So I'm very delighted that the book seems to have attracted a lot of attention quite quickly. And the reason for it is because even though there are literally hundreds of biographies of the Buddha, and there are even more books on Buddhism which include a biography of the Buddha, this one is completely different. So you would think with hundreds of books on the life of one person, there would be nothing new to say. But that's not the case, and that's what I'll talk about today. In actual fact, for the last probably 2,000 years, there have been two Buddhas. You didn't know that, did you? There is the Buddha of history, that is the real person who existed. He lived in a particular time, at a particular place. And then there is the Buddha of legend, tradition, imagination. And up till this book, to the best of my knowledge, every biography of the Buddha has been mainly based on tradition, legend, and imagination. So in actual fact, almost everything you know about the Buddha is probably not true. Everything you know about what he taught, that probably is, at least most of it. But as for the Buddha himself, most of it is probably not true. So, for example, if I was to ask you the Buddha's second name, his surname, if you like, was Gautama, what was his first name? Siddhartha, that's right. I mean, everybody knows that. It's not in the Tipitaka. You can go from the beginning to the end. That name isn't there. And what was his wife's name? Right. That name, you won't find that anywhere in the Tipitaka. It's not there. And not only that, there is no reference to him being married. You know, this wonderful story, he participated in an athletic competition and he beat all the others, and so he got the pretty girl. It's a great story. It's not in the Tipitaka. So, what was his father? I mean, you remember what his father's name was? You're a very naughty man. How long have you been coming to this place? 6 months. Oh, this is the third. I'll forgive you. Okay. You see, as soon as I do this, I know I can see the people at the back go like this, and other ones sort of like that. So I just saw you bow your head. What was his father's name? How long have you been coming here? I think I remember last year seeing you here. So you've been here for at least a year. No, seriously, it's okay. What was his father's name? Okay. Yeah. Sudodana, that's right. And it means pure rice. That's what it means. So, what was his father's occupation? He was a king. That's right. Well, you can read the Tipitaka from the beginning to end. You won't find any reference to his father being a king. And therefore, he wasn't a prince. It's very unlikely. Okay, there's Prince Siddhartha, He's been locked up in a beautiful palace.
Where do you get the idea it's not?
What's that?
It's not in the Tipika.
No, it's not. So in the legend it is. So the legend might be true. But if it is true, it's very strange. In the 50 volumes of the Tipitaka, they never mentioned that. That's strange.
If they don't mention doesn't mean that it's not.
No, you're absolutely correct. But I didn't say it's not true. I said it's not in the Tipitaka. Okay? Big difference there. So anyway, so then we know, at least some of us know, that he's locked up in a palace so that he will not find out about the ugly realities of life. And one day he gets out and he goes through a couple of us two and he sees 4 things. What does he see? What's one of the 4 things he sees? Thank you. What's another thing he sees? Huh? Before he saw that, what did he see? Okay, right. So the story is he saw an old man or an old person, a sick person, a dead person, and, as you said, a renunciate or a monk. Okay. Is that in the Tipitaka? What do you reckon? What? Okay. It is in the Tipitaka. Yep, it is. But it didn't happen to the Buddha. It happened to supposedly, one of the past Buddhas. Okay. So there he is. Before, as a result of that, he decides to renounce the world. So he sneaks out of the palace. They didn't have security cameras in those days, so nobody noticed. Well, unfortunately, in the Tipitaka, it says that when he was about to leave, his parents made a bit of a fuss. They tried to stop him. They were crying. That's what it says. Oh, that's funny. But before he left, he saw 2 things. The first thing he saw was his wife and his baby sleeping. He saw them and he felt very sorry, but I have to do what I have to do. And then he went into the next room, and before he left, he saw something else. What did he see? Well, we've got plenty of time. Come on, somebody must. No? Okay. Well, according to what most people know, is he saw the dancing girls, the female musicians, asleep. And, well, those of you who are married will know, when you wake up in the morning and you see your partner, when people are asleep, they don't look particularly good, do they? Dribble coming out of them. And he was disgusted. Is that story in the Tipitaka? Wrong. It is in there, yeah. But it didn't happen to the Buddha. According to the Tipitaka, it happened to the young man Yasa. So here we see an interesting example where somebody at a later time has taken 2 events and grafted them onto the Buddha's biography. And we have been told that that happened to him. Well, according to the Tipitaka, it didn't. It happened to other people. So what's going on here? Well, this is the reality. If you read the Dhammika, it says virtually nothing about the Buddha until he became a wandering ascetic. Prior to that, it says virtually nothing. And now why would that be? Well, probably because the great monks who met during the first council after the Buddha had passed away, so that they could preserve and therefore carry on the teachings. They simply weren't interested in what the Buddha did before he became a wandering ascetic. Whether he was married or not, who cares about that? We're interested in what he did as a monk and what he said as a monk. And so they simply never reported that. Then you have a huge amount of information about where the Buddha went. We have the names of some 900 places of where he went. He went to this village, this town, that mountain, this cave, etc. We have a huge amount of information about what he said. As I mentioned before, we don't know much about his life, but we know a great deal about what he said. We know a great deal of who he said it to, because when you read in the beginning of most of the sutras in the Tripitaka, it always starts, Ewang me sutang ekang samayang bhagava savatiyang viharati jetavane, and so on. Once the Buddha was staying in Sravasti or Rajagaha or somewhere, and he was talking to a particular person. So we know a lot about where he was when he said it. Often we know who he said it to and what prompted him to say it to that person. We know a great deal about that. But as for the events in his life, when they happened, we know virtually nothing. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, why would that be so? Well, I don't know. But first of all, the biography, that is, the story of a person's life, that wasn't a type of literature that existed in India at that time. However, as time went by, as one century passed and another one happened, people did get interested. They did want to know about his early life and whether he was married and when he had kids and all that sort of thing. But there was no information in the Tripitaka, in the records that had been kept in the Pali Tripitaka. There was no information. So what did they do? They told stories. Now, is that unusual? Not at all. You'll have heard of Sir Isaac Newton. I'm not even going to ask you if you know what Sir Isaac Newton did. Okay, let's risk it. What did Sir Isaac Newton do? What is it? Thank you very much. So he was the first person who worked out the reality of gravity. And how did he work it out? He was sitting under a tree and an apple fell on his head. It's not true. It never happened. Of course not. So even just 200 years ago, people told stories. It's a good story too, isn't it? I mean, it's about why do things go, when you let go of them, why do they go down rather than up or sideways? Well, and that's a great way to illustrate that story. The story about the four sights, that almost certainly probably never happened. But it's a great way to illustrate the idea of old age, sickness, and death, and a possible solution to that, becoming a wandering ascetic. So it's not to say that these stories aren't great. It's not to say that they're a wonderful way to communicate the Dhamma. It's just to say that they're not in the Tripitaka, and so chances are they probably never happened. People tell stories, and they have always done that. Another one, famous one, is George Washington chopping down the cherry tree. You know that famous story? Of course you don't know it. So the story is that George Washington was a very honest man. So the story goes that when he was a kid, he chopped down a cherry tree, and he was supposed not to do that, or he shouldn't have done it. And somebody said, "Did you do it?" And he said, "I did it." And that's supposed to illustrate the idea that even from childhood he was an honest and trustworthy kid. It's not true, it never happened. It's a nice way to illustrate that. So people have always told stories. And the stories that the ancient Buddhists, after the time of the Buddha, the stories that they told, some of them are really great. My favorite is the one about Prince Siddhartha. He wasn't a prince. Prince Siddhartha and the swan. This is a lovely story. And there are other lovely stories too. But if we are Buddhist and we want to know the Buddha better, we have to look at the records that we have. And the earliest records we have are not the legends and the stories. The earliest records we have are in the Tripitaka, in the Pali Tripitaka. And it's just fascinating how few Buddhists know this. And I'll give you an astonishing example of this. Now, I lived in Sri Lanka for 20 years. I'm interested in, not in just Buddhist philosophy and meditation, I'm interested in Buddhist culture. I'm interested in art. So whenever I heard that there's an old temple with beautiful paintings, I'd always go and have a look. And every now and then I'd see this lovely picture of the Buddha holding a lamb, a baby sheep. In Sri Lanka they have Vesak cards, like in my country they have Christmas cards. You send a Vesak card to your friends. I've seen Vesak cards with that same picture on it, the Buddha holding a lamb. I once was a judge in a Buddhist Sunday school's art competition. And one of the paintings, quite a good one done by a young kid, was a picture of the Buddha holding a lamb. Does anybody know the story behind that? Of course you don't. Well, you're going to learn something today. So the story is, the Buddha is going along the road one day, and in front of him there is a flock of sheep with a shepherd. The shepherd is taking them along. And at the very back of the flock is a lamb limping. He's slower than the others, so he's behind. So the Buddha is a kindly person. He picks up the lamb and he asks the shepherd, "Where are you taking these sheep?" And he said, "I'm taking them to Rajagaha because King Bimbisara is having a great sacrifice. They're going to be sacrificed." So the Buddha goes along there, he meets King Bimbisara, and he encourages him to give up this awful practice. That's the story. That's a great story. Where does it come from? Now, it must be true, because I've seen it on temple wall paintings. I've seen it on Vesak cards. Okay, there's a book published in Singapore by a Sri Lankan monk. It's called The Greatest Man in History. And on the front cover is a picture of the Buddha holding a lamb. Where does the story come from? It was invented in about 1870 by an Englishman. Yeah. So there was an Englishman called Edwin Arnold. He was a poet. He wrote a very, very famous poem called The Light of Asia. It's still in print, it's still read. It's a very, very famous poem, and it's about the life of the Buddha. Now, I don't know why Sir Edwin Arnold did this, but he created this story and put it in his poem. Now, I happen to think that that was a very clever thing for him to do. He was a Christian. He wrote in English, so almost everybody who read his poems were English, and therefore 99% of them were probably Christian. And undoubtedly in their church and in their religious paintings, they would have seen pictures of Jesus holding a lamb. Why did Jesus hold a lamb? Because according to the Bible, he is the good shepherd. According to the Bible, Jesus said that God is like a good shepherd. When he brings his sheep home, if one is missing, he leaves the others and goes to try to find the lost sheep. So the idea of that story is God loves everybody, but the lost sheep, the sinners, the poor, those who have been neglected, forgotten by others, despised by others, God loves them. He has extra love for them. That's a great idea. And so because of this title, the Good Shepherd, Jesus is quite often shown as a shepherd holding a sheep. So wasn't that clever of him? He was writing for an English audience, a Western audience, a poem about a person from India, and he wanted to make the Buddha less unfamiliar to his readers. So he created this story of not only does Jesus hold up a lamb, well, so does this guy in this poem. I think that was very clever. I give him top marks for that. It's just a story, but this is not a story invented by Buddhists 1,000 years ago or 500 years after the Buddha. This is a story invented or created by an Englishman only about 150 years ago, and most Buddhists think that story comes from their sacred scriptures. That I find extremely disappointing. They know their scriptures so poorly that they don't even know that a story invented by an Englishman only 150 years ago, they think that comes from their own scriptures. Amitofo. Yeah.
How old was the painting you saw?
Which painting?
The painting that you saw, the art?
Oh, well, I saw many of them. Which one do you want me to?
I mean, how old is the painting?
Oh, well, one of the temples that I went to was early 18th century. So, isn't this interesting? Isn't this sad? We know our sacred literature so poorly that we can even mistake something like that for being a part of our sacred tradition. Okay, that's the background. So then I come along and I decide, wouldn't it be a good idea just to go through the sacred scriptures and just see what does it say about the Buddha? And the first thing you notice is, as for a continuous narrative story, there isn't one. So once again, in the Bible, you have stories about the birth of Jesus and what he did, and then he was baptized by John the Baptist, and then he started teaching, and he got into trouble, and then he was eventually executed. So you have a narrative story from birth to death, from the beginning to the end. There is nothing like that in the Tripitaka. But what there is actually hundreds of small pieces of information about him. That is, about him as a human being, as an individual with a particular character. That you have a lot of information. And that's what this book is about. So, for example, there's quite a lot illustrating that he had quite ordinary habits. So, for example, there is one brief reference to the Buddha standing just with his bathing robe on, drying himself after having a bath. Now, there's nothing remarkable about that. You must have done that yourself. What is remarkable is when we look at pictures of the Buddha, he's usually sitting on a lotus. And he has this golden light coming out of his head. And for reasons I've never really understood, he has really weird looking hair. I don't know why they do that. In other words, he's not quite human. But here we have a very brief mention of the Buddha standing in his robe, drying himself after having a bath. We have a reference when the Buddha is giving a talk and he sneezes. Aumi Tova, Buddhas don't sneeze. Yes, they do, according to the Dhammika. Why shouldn't they? I'm sure the Buddha sometimes picked his nose. Why not? You must have done that once. Yeah, thank you for that. I've done it too. You look, and then you look around to make sure nobody's looking, and then go on, you've done it, haven't you? I don't know. Certainly there's nothing in the Dhammika that says that. But in this particular incident, he sneezes. And I don't know what happens in Malaysia, but so what happens in Malaysia if somebody sneezes? What do you say to them?
Bless you.
Bless you. How do you say it in Malay? Is there a Malay way of saying it? Huh? I don't know. Okay. Yeah, we say bless you or something like that, or God bless you or something like that. Well, here's the Buddha. He's giving a talk to an audience. He sneezes and people shout out, "Long live." Apparently that's what they used to say in India. And then he says, he addresses them and he says, listen, when somebody sneezes and you say long live, do they live long as a result of that? And people say, no, not really. He says, then don't do that anymore. But my favorite one is this. In one place, the Buddha says, when I'm on a journey and I have to go to the toilet, I look up the road to make sure nobody's coming. Then I look down the road to make sure nobody's coming. And then I squat down and have a poo. Now, I think that must be true, because I cannot imagine any other tradition saying that about their great spiritual leader. But once again, here is an example of a record of a person doing a perfectly ordinary human thing. And it reinforces for us, or it should, the idea that the Buddha did not sit on a lotus. He did not have golden skin. He did not have a light coming out of his head. Physically, he was not much different from you and I. Before I came here to Malaysia, I was in Sri Lanka for a while, and I was invited to the most prestigious Buddhist institution in the country, the University of Pali and Buddhist Studies, and I was asked to talk about my book. And just a few days before I did that, the owner of one of the television stations there, obviously a very wealthy man, invited me to his home for a dana. So I went. And when I arrived, his oldest son, maybe about 20, was at the door with a bowl of water, and he washed my feet. And then he dried my feet, and then I walked into the house, and there was a white sheet for me to walk on until I got to the chair. I thought that was very interesting. It has happened to me many times before. It is a tradition in Sri Lanka. It's a nice tradition. There is an incident in the Dhammika where the Buddha is invited to a palace for a meal. And the prince puts out a white carpet for him, or the white thing. The red carpet treatment? Huh? That would be the Indian equivalent, a white carpet treatment. And the Buddha approaches the palace and he stops before the white thing. And the prince says, "What's the problem?" Buddha says nothing. 3 times he asks, 3 times the Buddha refuses to say anything. So Ananda speaks for him. He says to the prince, "The Lord will not walk on that white cloth because he is concerned about future generations." The Lord will not walk on that cloth because he's concerned about future generations. Now, it doesn't say what that means, what he had in mind when he said that. What do you think? Any ideas? What was he concerned about? That cloth should be white? It should be red rather than white?
Wasting resources.
Wasting resources. Wasting resources? Possible. What's that? And what would be wrong with perpetuating that tradition? Well, he just said that, yeah. Yeah. Oh, don't I agree with you? Absolutely. I think he was concerned that we, the members of the Sangha, might start being treated like royalty. I'm so holy, I need a white cloth. I'm so holy and special, you have to get down and wash my feet. I suspect very strongly that's what the Buddha was concerned about. And if he was, and he was still alive, he'd probably be rather disappointed. Because it seems to me that this is exactly what's happened. Interesting. Now, I just want to mention here, everything that I am saying, if you look at the bottom of each page, I give the reference. You can look up in the Tipitaka and you can find out, I haven't lied, I haven't invented everything. Everything is referenced, so you can check it, okay? That's what it says in the Tipitaka. Then I found another thing. I found quite a few places where it mentions the Buddha approaching somebody's house or approaching a public hall, and it mentions he leant down and washed his own feet. Amitabha, Buddhas don't wash their own feet. The Devas come down and do it for them. No, not according to the Tipitaka. The Buddha washed his own feet. So once again, is there anything great about washing your own feet? Not particularly. But within this context, it shows us that the Buddha was a real and in many ways an ordinary human being. What made him different was not the way he behaved or the way he looked or how his body functioned. It was here and here. This is what made him different. Far above us. But in other ways, very normal. I found that the Buddha was somewhat prudish. So, for example, he didn't like singing. He asked his monks if they're going not to laugh, and that if you smile, don't smile enough to show your teeth. I'm sorry to say that I have to disobey and disagree with the Buddha on this one. I'm very suspicious of people who don't smile. I'm rather suspicious of people who can't laugh. When I see some of these holy monks, everything is impermanent, I'm suspicious of them. If you can't smile, and to be honest, if you can't laugh, I've got problems with that. Now, if you were to laugh all of the time, and to laugh when people slipped over or something like that, yeah, I would agree with that. The Buddha was somewhat prudish. He didn't like music. He advised his disciples to rise early and not to be out late. I think that's probably pretty good advice. But in a modern world, he didn't like the theatre. Oh, you may know there's a story that in the Tripitaka that a theatre manager, they had them in those days, came to him once and said, I have been told that when old actors and actresses, when they die, they go to the heaven with the laughing gods. Is that true? The Buddha said, don't ask me. He kept on insisting. And then he said, finally, because he was forced to answer, he said, no, it's not true. They go to the weeping gods. And the poor old theatre manager broke into tears. And I thought, it's a bit much, isn't it? There's all these movie stars and these wonderful movies and the theatre and everything. And then I thought, how often do you hear popular artists getting involved in drugs or alcohol or sexual misconduct? How often? All the time. How often do you hear them having, being divorced and getting married and being divorced 6 months later and being married again? And yeah, maybe he was right. Maybe even in those days they had pretty reckless sort of lives. Perhaps maybe they do get reborn in the heaven of the weeping gods. I don't know. Anyway, certainly the Buddha comes across as somewhat prudish. It's interesting to know, because I looked up, how does the Buddha address people? Well, when he was talking to a king, he addressed them as Maharaja. When he was talking to a chief, he always addressed them as Raja. Now, I think you asked me, was it you who asked me, how do I know that Prince Siddhartha wasn't a prince? Was that you who asked me that? Yeah. So all we have to do is look at the word Raja. So we hear of Maharajas and Indian Maharajas and whatever. So the word used to mean a chief. And it probably referred to an elected chief. So, for example, we know amongst the Sakyans, they had a body of men called Raja Makers. It's in the Tripitaka. Men who made the Raja. Now, kings aren't made, they are born. If your father is a king, then you're born a king. You're the next in line. So when we look at how the word Raja was used in ancient India, it originally meant a chief. At the time of the Buddha, Indian society was changing. You were starting to have kings, not elected leaders, like the Sakyans had, and the Mullahs had, and the people in Vaishali had. They had elected leaders. You were starting to have the beginning of monarchies. And so the word Raja was in transition. It was changing, as language does change, from meaning a chief to meaning a king. But it didn't, as it was used at the time of the Buddha, it didn't just mean a king. It would still be used for a chief. Kings, the Buddha addressed as Maharaja. Chiefs, like his father almost certainly was, he addressed as Raja. When he was talking to laymen, he would address them by their clan name. So Gautama, which is the Buddha's clan, that was his clan name. His name, we don't know what his first name was, but sometimes he was addressed as Gautama. That was his clan name. In fact, you have clans in Chinese, don't you? You're from Hokkien or this place or that, the Lims and the Chows and all of that sort of thing, isn't it? Huh? Well, they had those in India too. And your clan was very important. It was almost a part of your family. So he referred to kings as Maharaja. He addressed them as Maharaja. He addressed chiefs as Raja. He addressed laymen by their clan name. But when he was talking to Sakyans, members of his clan, he always used their first name. That's interesting. Why did he do that? Well, then we read that if you were a wandering ascetic and you had a discussion with the Buddha and you decided the sect that you're belonging to doesn't have the answers, the Buddha's got the answers. So you said to the Buddha, I want to join your group, I want to join your Sangha, you'd have a 3-month waiting period. If you were a Sakyan, he ordained you straight away. So he addressed them by their personal name, and he trusted them enough, or was biased towards them enough, that they didn't have to have a 3-month waiting period. This may suggest that he had a certain prejudice in favour of his own people, of his own clansmen. Is that good or bad? I don't know. But it tells us something about an individual. We know something about this man's relationship with the members of his clan. And I'll talk about one last thing. No, I'll talk about 2 last things. One whole chapter in the book is given over to the Buddha's travels. Now, I mentioned before that there are some 900 places it mentions the Buddha went. And I have in the book, there is a map showing you the extent of the places that the Buddha went. Now, have anybody here been to India to visit the Buddha's sacred places? No? Oh, not too many of you, but some of you. Where did you go? Where were some of the places you went? And? Would it be Buddha Gaya, I suppose? Yeah. You go to, most people go to those places. When I first went to India, I went to those places too. But what I've done is I've read the Indian Archaeological Survey's reports. Now, these reports go back over 100 years. First of all, the British exploring all these ancient ruins and digging up ancient cities, and they've been doing that until, well, they still do it today. And I read them very, very carefully, and I've been able to find quite a lot of other places that are mentioned in the Tipitaka of the Buddha going there. Why somebody has not done that before, I don't know. But when you know that the Buddha went to this place, and you can identify that place today, and you read that the Buddha went to this place, and you can identify that place today also, you can measure the distance between them and work out how far he walked. And then you discover sometimes the Buddha walked large, long distances. Did he use an umbrella? Why did you shake your head? Why wouldn't he have used an umbrella?
Simple traveling light.
Traveling light?
Yes.
Well, I don't know whether you're right or not, because there's no mention of it in the Tipitaka, but that's a good Good answer. Did he wear sandals? There's no mention of him wearing sandals. You've already read the book, have you? Oh, so good guess. Okay. When did he travel? Well, there are 3 seasons in India. We know, because it's mentioned many, many times, that during the 3.5 months of the rainy season, he stayed in one place. That gives him 9 months, 2 other seasons to travel, the winter and the summer. Now, the winter in India can actually be quite cold enough that you need a blanket. The summer is like a furnace. It is like a furnace. I don't know why it's so hot, but there you go. So some of his journeys must have been taken in the height of summer. Why? And sometimes in the winter. So during the day in winter, it can be quite warm or sometimes hot, but in nighttime, it is very cold. So it seems that the Buddha traveled really during the worst time of the year, the summer, and that season where at night time, and he would have been sleeping out in the open, it was quite cold. Once again, we have a very interesting sutta where Hataka of Alavi was a particular village or town, he's out quite late at night and he sees the Buddha sitting, meditating under a tree. And he comes up to him and he says, "It's very cold. The cold wind is blowing. There are not many leaves on the tree. And your robes are very thin. Are you happy out here in the cold?" And the Buddha answered, "Yes, I'm happy." And the two of them have a talk. So here we have a description of the Buddha basically out in a cold night. And it seems to me, although it's not specifically said in the Tipitaka, that he did this and he endured these difficulties because he wanted as many people as possible to know his Dhamma, as many people as possible to have an opportunity to free themselves from dukkha. And that brings to the final point I want to make. The overwhelming impression that comes about the Buddha from the Tipitaka is that he was exceptionally kind, compassionate, thoughtful, concerned about the welfare of others. This comes in nearly every page. People sensed that they were in the presence of a person who genuinely cared about them and was concerned for their welfare. And that is mentioned time and time again. So his physician, he had his own, at least a man who treated him when he became sick. Does anybody know what the physician's name was? Jivaka, that's right. Thank you. At last. Jivaka. So in one place, Jivaka says this, "I have been told that Brahma, God, I have been told that Brahma is compassionate. But I have seen with my own eyes that you, the Lord, are compassionate." I think that's very interesting. Maybe God's compassionate, maybe he's not. Who knows? But here, a person is talking about his own personal experience of meeting and communicating with the Buddha. I've seen with my own eyes. He's a very kind person. So, that's the purpose of the book. And then there are two appendix in the book. In one appendix, I give details about, I think it's 25 places where the Buddha lived or stayed. And there is a map there so you can identify where it is. And the second one, I discuss whether the Buddha copied the idea of karma and rebirth, whether he copied these ideas from the prevailing religion, which was Hinduism. And I read this in many, many books. The Buddha was influenced by Hinduism, or he borrowed the idea of karma and rebirth from Hinduism. It isn't true. And I give details from ancient literature to show that that is not the case. So that's the book, that's what it's about. And as I said, so far, it has met with a great deal of interest, which makes me very happy. And I think the book is unique. It's the first book of its kind to look at the Buddha as he is presented in the earliest records that we have. My hope is that maybe sometime in the future, somebody will be inspired by that and then improve and find more details and write a better book than mine, although I hope that doesn't happen. Okay, that's all I have to say for this afternoon. If there's anything you'd like to ask about it, please, about what I've said, please, very welcome to ask a question, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. Yeah.
There's something which I always find very difficult to reconcile. Just before the Buddha gained enlightenment and said under the Bodhi tree, you always see images of the Buddha being very, very thin, very thin, skeleton-like, and then he was felt mesmerized by I think Lady Sujata.
Right.
And then when he gained enlightenment, you see a perfectly normal human being with flesh and so on, no longer the skeleton that you always see. So how do you cover this in your book? This is something I cannot reconcile.
Okay.
From a skeleton-like person to a normal person.
Well, I can't reconcile it, and I don't have to, because that's just what artists do. Okay? So, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is a question about how artists depict the Buddha. Okay? So there is no evidence that he was skeletal and thin as he sat under the Bodhi tree. In fact, the evidence is the opposite of that. In the, I think it's the Aryapariyesana Sutta, he says that after he gave up his austerities, when he was thin and what have you, he washed, he ate properly and regained his strength. I have the actual Pali words there. So that's simply something that the artists do. But you have you have mentioned something that I can say about two things. So Sujata gave him some milk rice. Yeah? Is that in the Tripitaka?
I don't know.
I do know. It's not there.
Oh.
Okay? But this may interest you. How many times is the Bodhi tree that the Buddha sat under? How many times is that mentioned in the Tripitaka? Well, I must have read things about the Bodhi tree. Every single book that I've read mentions the Bodhi tree. How many times is it mentioned in the Tripitaka? Obviously, it's important to modern Buddhists. Twice. That's it. And it just mentions he sat under a Bodhi tree, that's all. And of those two references, one of them is almost certainly much later. Interesting, isn't it? Isn't it interesting that the things that the Arahats at the first council felt were really important, we don't seem to find particularly interesting. And the things that we get really excited about, they weren't at all. They didn't think these things were particularly important. Funny that, isn't it? Anything else?
Bhante, speaking about the poetry, just wondering, is there any mention in the Tipitaka regarding the 7 weeks after the enlightenment? The Buddha's reported to have done this and that, including gazing at the poetry and all that.
Yes. Now we get into some difficulties. So yes, there is. In the beginning of the Vinaya, it gives, well, I think there are two, Venerable Priyadasi might be able to help me here. There are two versions of the story. One is 4 weeks and the other is 7 weeks. Is it?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. So one is 4 weeks. 4 specific things are supposed to happen, and the other one is 7 weeks. I've got serious problems about both of them. Now, when we look, I think altogether, if I remember correctly, there are 6 accounts of the Buddha's enlightenment in his own words. And in only one of them does it mention what happened after his enlightenment, and all the things that's supposed to happen to him in the 4-week version and the 7-week version. Only one of those events is mentioned in what he himself says. And that is in the Aryapariyesana Sutta, where he says he became enlightened, and then he thought, oh my God, if I was to try to teach, nobody would listen to me. If I gave sermon after sermon and then I asked them any questions, they wouldn't have the faintest idea how to answer. I think I'm just going to sit here and enjoy the bliss of enlightenment. And then what happened?
Brahma came to him.
Who?
I can't remember the name.
You just said
So
it.
Brahma came to
Right.
him and asked him to teach Dharma.
Right. Okay. It's a good story, isn't it? I like that story, where he says he looked out across the world with his special eye, and he saw people, and they were like lotuses. Many of them, they sort of came out of the mud at the bottom of the lake, but they never got any higher. Look at all these lotuses. And some got a little bit higher, but they still didn't get to the surface. And then some got to the surface, but they never opened. But a few, those with but little dust in their eyes, they rose above the surface and they opened. I think that is a lovely story. And supposedly it was Brahma who got the Buddha to change his mind. Now, I've got a special relationship with Brahma. So at that time, Brahma was the supreme god in the Hinduism of the time. Then after about 400 or 500 years, he sort of became unemployed. He was redundant because other gods had become more popular, and he was basically forgotten. And in India today, there is one temple to Brahma in the whole of India, where there must be hundreds of thousands of Hindu temples, There is only one temple to Brahma. In other words, he's a has-been. His significance in Hinduism simply faded away, and the dominant gods became Shiva and Vishnu and what have you. So Hinduism is a very fluid religion. It changes a lot. And this is fascinating. I find this absolutely fascinating. There is really only one country in the world where Brahma is still worshipped. Nearly every day. Not India. Thailand. What they call praprom, which means, actually praprom is the Thai way of saying Maha Brahma. Pra is how Thais say Maha, and prom is Brahma. When you speak to a Thai in English, they'll talk about what they call the four-faced Buddha. In Singapore, I see statues of them everywhere, including in Buddhist temples. So here we have a country supposed to be Buddhist, and it's the only place in the world where this Hindu god is still widely worshipped. I'm only a simple monk. I can't understand this. Okay? However, you've asked a question. I'm sorry, you asked the question. What can that mean? Is there such a God? I don't think so. I'm a skeptic. When Brahma comes down to me and asks me to teach people, well, what am I going to say? I'm going to say they're like locusts. Most of them never rise above the water. No, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is, where else do we find the word Brahma or the name Brahma in Buddhism? Where else? Is there any other Pali phrases or terms where we find the word Brahma?
Brahmacharya.
What is it?
Brahmacharya.
Brahmacharya? Good. Another one? Brahmavihara? Same? Yeah. In fact, you find Brahmachakra, you find very frequently this word is used. But I'm particularly interested in the Brahmavihara. Now, this is as I understand that story. I don't think that story is meant to be taken literally. I think it's meant to represent, Brahma is meant to represent the Brahmaviharas. Now, the word the name Brahma itself means the highest. That's simply all it means. So, for example, in ancient India, capital punishment, chopping up somebody's head, that's called Brahmadanda, the highest punishment, the ultimate punishment. That's all the word means. So, in Brahmavihara, it means the highest or the best way of living. That is, living with love, compassion, sympathetic, joy, and equanimity. So I think this is a poetic way, if you like, or a metaphorical way of saying after the Buddha's enlightenment, he may have, at least in the beginning, when he hadn't fully integrated the profound understandings that he had attained, he did that. He thought, what's the hell? If I just taught what I have understood, people will just argue with me. I'm just going to sit here. But then, love and compassion, sympathetic joy and equanimity arose in him, and that's what made him change direction from what he originally intended. That's as I interpret that story. Anything else?
Bhante, just another question.
Oh.
You frequently mentioned about during the Buddha's time there was Hinduism. Was it Hinduism or Brahmanism?
Okay, very good question. You've been doing a little bit of reading, have you?
little bit.
Good. Yes, there was no Hinduism at that time. There was Brahmanism, and that's different from Hinduism. It's very different. So what we find is 900, nearly 1,000 years after the Buddha, there was a series. The religion of that time is usually called Vedic Brahmanism. It's based on a collection of texts, a collection of hymns to the gods called the Vedas. Okay? And so that was the religion, and it was based on primarily on sacrifices. So and these sacrifices were performed by the priests of the time, Brahmins. You still have Brahmins in India today. So they would build an altar, and then they would do all sorts of chanting. They would chant these hymns, these Vedic hymns, and they would throw offerings into the fire. Grain, ghee, cakes, things like that. Occasionally they'd slaughter animals and throw them into the fire. And the belief was that as they burned and turned into smoke, the smoke went up to the gods. And so if you made the right type of offerings and the gods were happy with it, they'd give you what you wanted. Okay? So that was the religion. There was more to it than that, but that was the essence of it. Now that religion still was current at the time of the Buddha. Now if you look at the gods that are mentioned in the Vedas, almost none of them are worshipped in India today by Hindus. Why? Well, over the centuries, Brahmanism changed. And gradually it started to resemble what we would identify as Hinduism today. So if I was to ask you the name of some Hindu gods, you'd probably say Vishnu, Shiva,
Ganesh.
Thank you, Ganesh, who else? Saraswati, Rama, Krishna. None of those are mentioned in the Vedas. And the gods that are mentioned in the Vedas, most Hindus have never even heard of them because they don't read. So it is actually more accurate to say that one of the prevailing religions, not the only one, but one of the prevailing religions at the time of the Buddha was Brahmanism. Hinduism evolved later. And this is why I mentioned before that the Buddha could not have copied the idea of karma and rebirth from Hinduism, because Hinduism didn't exist at that time. And in the Vedas, there is no reference whatsoever to the doctrine of karma or the doctrine of rebirth. They didn't believe in reincarnation or rebirth. They believed that you went to the Pretaloka, the world of the fathers, and your son, you had to have a son. A woman couldn't do it. Women can't do anything there. Your son had to make regular offerings to your father and your grandfather, and that kept them happy in the world of the fathers. Incidentally, that's still done today. But the belief behind it is it's just a carryover from a very ancient tradition. So you're quite right. You're absolutely correct. What we call Hinduism now simply didn't exist at the time of the Buddha. Anything else?
Bhante, what
Yes.
do you mean by semi-retirement in your Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Semi-retirement.
Yep.
What does that mean?
It means I'm not entirely retired, and if I was, I wouldn't be here today. So I very rarely give talks anymore. I live on a small island, I have a small garden, I work in the garden, I feed the birds, I have a very large library, I read, I write, and for the first time for many years, I do a lot of meditation, because now I don't have to worry about new people. Fantastic. Yeah,
Do you have any comments about the relics? There are so many relics around.
there are so many relics around, is there? Oh,
They're
Yeah.
selling it as well.
yeah. So what's the question?
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, is it authentic, that relic?
well, I'm just okay. So the question is, there's lots of relics around. Are they authentic? Well, I'm going to tell you my personal feeling. I think they're all fake, without exception. Every one of them is fake. Okay? That's it. Now,
Bhante, Jainism.
no, please let me
Yes,
finish.
okay, sorry.
Thank you. In today's world, you have the art market. You know, the buying and the selling of great works of art, and very wealthy people sometimes buy a work by Picasso or Michelangelo. Some of these paintings, some of these works of art are worth millions of dollars. And so some people, very wealthy people, buy these sometimes to put in their home because they love that particular artist, or often as an investment. You spend $20 million on a Picasso, you keep it for 15 years and it's worth $25 million. It's a very good investment. You don't have to do anything, you just have to, okay? However, because this market, the art market, is so profitable, what happens when there's money? There'll always be people cheating to try to get some of it. So they reckon roughly 50% of all of the great art that goes on sale is fake. At least 50%. So if you were to ever buy a Picasso, say, you'd want to know for sure whether it's genuine or not. And the guys that fake these paintings are very good at it. So what happens is, when the art organizations, the businesses, when somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I've got a Picasso, would you like to buy it?" They go, "Where did you get it from?" "Oh, my father bought it 40 years ago." "Where did he get it from?" They will want to know its provenance. Where did it come from? How far back can we trace it? You understand? Now, in some cases, with documentation and all sorts of things, you can trace it back depending on how old it is. Let's say it's a Picasso. You can trace it right back to Picasso. Maybe in one of Picasso's diaries, he mentioned painting it. Wow, man, you've got a genuine. But if you can't prove where it originally came from, sorry, not interested. So I was in a particular temple just the other day, and they told me a Thai monk had given them, gifted to them, a relic. And I just said, "Where did he get it from?" They didn't know, they didn't even ask. And if I'd have asked, he probably wouldn't been able to give an answer, or more likely he'd have lied. So in Singapore, they've got one of the most beautiful temples. It's definitely the most beautiful temple in Singapore, the Buddhist Tooth Temple. So the monk who runs that temple, he claims that he went to Burma and a monk there gave him a relic of the Buddha's tooth. Now, if you had a relic of the Buddha's tooth, would you give it to a stranger? Of course you wouldn't. If you had a fake tooth and you know that that monk is really quite rich, would you have maybe told a bit of a lie and gave him a dog's tooth? You might think of it. They're all fake, every single one of them, okay? And I think some people, their hearts are not bad, they're good, they're pious, they're devout. But I think, so the monk who told me that he had a relic given to him by Thai monk. Maybe that monk is sincere, but somewhere along the line, somebody has cheated. Somebody has lied. Somebody has deliberately created something, and almost certainly not out of piety, not out of saddha, but for money. So I think that not only are they fake, this is a whole business, and I think it's very unfortunate. Okay? Now I'll add one more thing to it. In about 1890, I think it was, an Englishman in India, he had a large property, and on that property was a grassy mound. And he knew something about archaeology. There were lots of broken bricks around there, and he thought, this might be some ancient building. So he dug it up. As it so happened, it was an ancient stupa. We now know that stupa is built in what was Kapilavastu, the Buddha's homeland. And when he dug down, he found a large stone box. We have photographs of all of this. We have documentation, we have photographs. And he opened it and he found some caskets, some stone caskets, and in those caskets were fragments of burnt bone. Those fragments are now in the National Museum in New Delhi. You can go and see them. What's my opinion about this? My opinion about this is this. If there are any genuine relics of the Buddha, it's them. Not one other one, not even one. But if there are any relics, I'd say it's those ones. Why? Because we know that when they were put in the ground and the bricks were put around it and the stupa was built over it, nobody has touched them until that Englishman dug them up 120 years ago or something. In other words, we know their provenance. Do you understand what I mean? You don't understand? Oh. Should I repeat all this again? Okay. We know the history of this thing. Sometimes possibly shortly after the Buddha died, those fragments of bone were put in that stupa, and nobody has touched them since then. So this king didn't fight over them, and that monk didn't get them, and he didn't give them to this guy, and that guy didn't, and then they got lost for 40 years, and then somebody found it. And no, they have been there ever since they were put in. And do you understand? And since they were dug up, we know exactly where they've gone, who's touched them, and where they are now. So their provenance is pretty good. There's another thing I'd like to mention. Have you seen some relics recently or something?
Yeah, so one somewhere. Building.
What do they look like? They're little teeny things, aren't they? In Sri Lanka, they always look like tiny pearls. The Buddha was eating pearls, was he? These relics that I'm talking about, they are called the Kapilavastu relics. Another thing about them is, when the Buddha died, his body was burnt. And what do these relics look like? They don't look like little pearls. They're not tiny little things. They look like pieces of burnt bone. Every relic I've seen since then looks like a little diamond, or it looks like a little pearl, or it looks like a little white ball. What the hell was the Buddha eating white balls? It's all a bluff. It's all nonsense. Now, I'm just giving you my personal opinion, okay? You're free to believe what you like. Yeah, what was your question?
Yeah, Bhante, just now you mentioned about Brahmanism. How about Jainism during the Buddha's time?
What about it?
What about it? What is
Okay.
Jainism? Yeah.
Well, I mentioned when I answered this question that one of the prevailing religions at the time of the Buddha was Brahmanism. Another one was Jainism. Yes, you're quite correct. It's not called Jainism in the Tripitaka. It's the members of this religion were called Niganthas because Nigantha means no bonds. In other words, they're free. And about 1,000 years ago, they took on another name, Jainism. So, but anyway, we won't use the word Nigantha, Jainism. So that's a religion that still prevails in India. So that religion was started about 200 years before the Buddha. And then about maybe 10 or 15 years before the Buddha, another man whose name was Nataputta, son of Nata, he was a follower of that religion. He claimed to be enlightened, and then he changed that religion a little bit based on his own experiences. And he was teaching at the time of the Buddha. So his new, revitalized version of that religion became one of the dominant religions of the time of the Buddha. So in the Tripitaka, you often find dialogues or discussions between the Buddha and a Brahmin, or the Buddha and some lay follower of Brahmanism. And very often you find discussions between the Buddha and a Jain, Nigantha. Okay? Now, Jainism is very similar to Buddhism. It is really very close to Buddhism. There are two major differences. The first difference is that Jainism teaches that humans have a soul, an Atman. Of course, the Buddha taught Anatman, no soul. And the second thing is, Jainism taught that anything you do, indeed, everything you do, creates karma. You scratch your head, that's karma. Yeah, that's karma. Anything you do. You do something right, you do something wrong, you do something neutral, pick up a piece of paper, that's karma. Everything that happens to you now is a result of what you did in the past. Okay? Now, the Buddha turned that on its head. He understood that when you do something intentional, that creates karma. So the first thing he did was talk about karma in terms of morality, the moral or the ethical significance of something. So picking up a piece of paper is neither good nor bad. It has no karmic effect. If I walk from here to there and I accidentally step on an ant, I kill the ant, but I didn't mean to do it. So that doesn't create any negative karma. If I walk from here to there and I see an ant and I go, that's karma. It's an ethically significant action, and it will have some effect. It will have some outcome. Okay? That was the Buddhist genius. So these are two major differences between Buddhism and Jainism. But this is something that I find very interesting. I have heard monks 1,000 times say that everything that happens to you is due to karma. You get cancer, that's because you did something bad in your last life. You win the lottery, that's because you gave lots of kung paos to monks in your last life. And so on, and so on, and so on. This is Jainism, this is not Buddhism. Everything that happens to you is not due to karma. Some might be. Probably most of it isn't. I don't know how this misunderstanding came about, but next time you hear a monk say, or somebody else say, that everything that happens to you is due to your karma, you tell them Venerable Dhammika disagrees with you, and incidentally, so does the Buddha. The Buddha did not teach that. Before I came here, I went to a great Jain pilgrim center in India. It's called Shravanabelagola. And it was so nice. It's right on the top of a huge hill, a huge statue. And it's really quite it's really quite astonishing walking around in a crowd, and there's a man stark naked. Holy Toto. Just like at the time of the Buddha, because the Niganthas were naked, they didn't wear any clothes, and they still don't wear any clothes. And I think it's a good idea. You save a hell of a lot on washing bills. It's fantastic. It takes a few minutes to sort of, what, that guy's got no clothes on. But this is the interesting thing. I went there as a Buddhist monk, and it's full of Jain people, and all of them were so respectful. They reverenced me as they did their own monks. And I've always found Jain people to be very open and friendly and very nice people. So I really had a nice time there. Anyway, that's another thing. Any other questions? Yeah.
Bhante, can I ask you this simple question? You see, was the Buddha really bald? Because all the images shows he has a lot of hair, but the monks are all clean shaven today. Thank you.
Yeah. It's mentioned numerous times in the Tripitaka. The Buddha shaved his head, just like other monks did. When he sometimes met Brahmins who didn't like him, one of the insults they threw at him was that he was shaven-headed, bald-headed, baldy. Okay. So when we see statues of the Buddha with one here, okay, there's one there, with hair, this is an artistic tradition. This has nothing to do with the Dhamma. Okay. So that's the answer to your question. The Buddha shaved his head just like other monks did. Somebody else had a...
Bhante, this is just to maybe to clear my misunderstanding. Just now we're
How do you know
discussing.
it's misunderstanding?
It might be a misunderstanding on my part.
Okay, I'll tell you.
Just now
what
we
it is,
discussed
right?
that when the Buddha was enlightened, he hesitated whether he's going to teach the Dhamma. So from what I understand, for him to become a Sammasambuddha, he made a vow, many lifetimes, and before he descended to human realm, he was in Tusita heaven, and his so-called mission is to become enlightened and to teach the Dhamma. So there will be a sasana by Gautama Buddha. But when I heard that he hesitated whether to teach the Dhamma, so has he forgotten that he?
Right. Yeah.
Had he decided not to teach the Dhamma, then he didn't get to accomplish what he
Good
vowed.
question. That's a very sensible question. Okay, so and it's an understandable doubt. Okay, so in some places in the Tipitaka, that's what we're told that the Buddha had. Well, the Buddha must have had former lives. Whether it was in the Tushita heaven, that's what the tradition says. Whether that is so or not, that's another thing. Myself, I think it's better just to focus on what we could possibly know about the Buddha. And what we know about him was that he was born in 563 BC. I suspect that because he taught the idea of punarupatiya, rebirth or reincarnation, people maybe speculated about what had happened previously. Because you raise a very good point. So the tradition seems to suggest that he didn't attain enlightenment because he did all these things, but rather that it was predestined. It was predestined one world system ago. maybe. I can't say. I know what the tradition says. So what I do is I just focus on what we can know about a real person in his, if you like, his last life. I'd leave all those things. I sometimes wonder why they bother even teaching this. I mean, there's so many things we have to do. There's so many things the Buddha taught about how to live now. And we focus. I went to some Buddhist society some time ago and they had a great big chart about all the heaven realms. And when I asked them a few questions about the Dhamma, they had no idea. They could tell you a lot about the heavens. Well, that's really useful. I don't spend a lot of time on that. I leave that to others. And I would encourage you to do that too. We do know that he was born at a particular time, that when at some point in his life he abandoned his family, went in search for the truth, then he had some profound meditational experience in which he saw the nature of reality, and then he taught it. That's what our main focus should be on that. When people ask me, could you sum up the essence of Buddhism in one sentence, I always say yes. It's all about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Now, that doesn't mean that there are other things. There are lots of other things, like all the heaven realms. And how many lives ago did the Buddha make that vow? Must have been 10,000? No, it must have been 50,000. Oh, it could have been 100,000 and so on. We could go on forever. We simply don't know. That's what the tradition says. Okay? Let's say he made that vow 50,000 lifetimes ago. Is that any relevance to understanding the Four Noble Truths and practicing the Noble Eightfold Path? None whatsoever that I can see. So all these heaven realms and what type of jewels they wear. Some have got, earrings and they've got these wonderful hats and all this sort of thing. Whether that's true or not, I really couldn't care less. Because whether I believed it or not has nothing to do with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. How to treat your spouse. How to be an honest businessman. How to practice meditation. What type of meditation you might do. All those things, they can be related directly to the Noble Eightfold Path. How many gods there are, how long they live for, what colour their clothes are. It's nothing to do with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. That's the essence. So I think that this is an easy way to tell whether something is significant or not. Can I relate this to suffering, the cause of suffering, the possibility of resolving suffering and how to resolve suffering? Then it is essential. The rest is dressing. Some years ago I went to Japan and we went to some big department store, and one whole floor of the department was taken up by sweets, biscuits, lollies. I was blown away. And there were different sections there. Each of them was a different company. And one of the companies there, it proudly said, they provide biscuits for the imperial family. Omi Tovo. And I looked at it. Every one of them was a work of art. They were just so beautiful, and they looked very tasty too. So I couldn't possibly afford this. Nobody had given me an angpao. But I looked at them and found great delight in these, they're works of art. Anyway, somebody who was with me, we went to another one of these, which was not quite so expensive, but still very expensive. And I watched what happened. They took them out, put them in a box, and then they wrapped it in this exquisite paper in a beautiful, I mean, it was a work of art. And I was thinking, this is so beautiful. You could throw away the biscuits and just keep the packet. And then I think that's what we Buddhists sometimes do. We throw away, or we take no notice of the biscuits and we keep the package, the wrapping. Whether there are devas or not, and how long they live for, that's the wrapping. What colour the deva's clothes are, whether the Buddha made a vow 100,000 lifetimes ago. It's interesting if you want to spend time on that. It's not the essence. Focus on the essence. We'll have one last question if there's one. Okay. Oh, we'll wait until the...
Two related questions on karma and rebirth.
Right.
One is you mentioned that karma and rebirth, Buddha did not learn it from Brahmanism or influenced by it. So the question is, where did he get it from? And the second question is, why does he even bother to teach that? Why is he teaching that? Why is he teaching the karma and rebirth? Is there any need to teach that?
I couldn't hear the second one. Why did he
teach karma and rebirth?
Okay, so you've got two questions. Where did he get karma and rebirth from?
Yeah.
The idea of karma and rebirth from? And why did he teach it?
Yeah, it doesn't relate to noble evil path.
Oh no, I think it does.
It does.
Of course. So the question is, where did I'll address both your questions. So where did he get it from? Well, we know that Jainism taught a form of karma and rebirth before the Buddha. But as I just explained, the Buddhist idea of karma and rebirth is different. When the Buddha was asked, what is karma? He said, I say that intention is karma. That's not to be found in Jainism. So it would seem to be that the Jains, or the Jain teacher, Mahavira, or Nataputta, he, in his meditations, and that he had some glimpse of karma and rebirth, but not a complete glimpse. But the Buddha's experience was that he had a total picture, and that's what he says, that on the night that he was enlightened, he had 3 experiences. Anybody know? Oh. One is that he saw the rising and the passing away of beings. One is he saw how the mechanics of karma. And the third was that he saw actually how to eliminate the mental defilements. Okay? So that's where he got his idea of karma and rebirth from, that he had a direct, so he tells us, in his final meditation, he had a direct, profound understanding of how it works. So that's where he got it from. And that's why he taught it. Now you have said, well, what's that got to do with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path? Well, it's got a lot to do with it, because if we only lived once, if when we died that was it, then we wouldn't need Buddhism. But according to the Buddha, and it makes sense to me, we live again, which means that we're going to have to die again. It means we're going to have to fall in love and then fall out of love and divorce our spouse and maybe get a disease or perhaps we're going to have to. When the Buddha is talking about dukkha, he's talking about this continual, tiresome process of birth, life, and death. Okay? That's what the First Noble Truth is about. So rebirth and karma is central to the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, it seems to me. That's what I would say. And I've just remembered one thing that you mentioned about relics. Oh, see what happened? I said, that's okay. You're good. I'm glad. But did you see what happened? Relics?
Yeah, I was thinking of something.
Right. I don't know if you know the story about Vakkali. Well, I'll tell you it. That Vakkali was very sick. And so the Buddha went to see him. Why? Because he is a decent human being. When somebody you know is sick, it's only natural. It's a kindly thing to do and go and see them. And when the Buddha went to see Vakkali, he asked him, how are you going? How, are you getting better? Just as you and I would do. And Vakkali said, no, unfortunately it's not getting better, it's getting worse. I don't think I'm going to last. And the Buddha said, then do you have anything you're worried about? Do you have any remorse? And Vakkali said, no, the only thing I regret is I didn't have the opportunity to see you. Does anybody know what the Buddha's response to that was? Why do you want to see this dirty body of mine? See the Dhamma and you will see me. Because those who see me see the Dhamma. But the part of his answer that interests me is he described his body as dirty. So we supposedly put pieces of his dirty body in a thing and stick it on our shrine? Okay. That's what he himself thought of his physical form. Now, I don't think he meant that right then his body was dirty. What he meant was bodies are always exuding, unless you keep it clean, unless you wash it regularly, it gets rather smelly. So that's what he meant. The physical is burdensome. It needs to be looked after very carefully, otherwise it becomes sick, and that can make your life very, very miserable. And unless it's kept clean, it starts to smell. So why on earth would we get what he himself said, a piece of a dirty body, and make a big fuss of it? I find that very strange. Anyway, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interesting and useful questions. I hope some of the things that I've said you might find interesting, and I certainly hope that you'll be able to get a copy of the book. I think some copies are downstairs, and you might be interested in this one too. It just published in Malaysia. It's everything the Buddha had to say about food. You're Chinese, so that'll interest you a lot. And you'd be surprised, the Buddha had lots of interesting things to say about food. So the free copies, please take one, read it.
Buddha could be Chinese too.
What's that?
Buddha could be Chinese too. Buddha could be Chinese also.
I think he may have been. Well, I've seen statues of him and he certainly sometimes looked Chinese. Okay, thank you all very much, and bye.